Tibet. Tibet is a land that invokes Hollywood-inspired images of James Sheridan's Shangri-La, a mountainous mystical kingdom populated by Buddhist monks, nuns, and pious, prostrating laypeople. Elaborate monasteries amidst snow-capped peaks and yak-dotted grasslands. The very last image that anyone expects to see in the landscape of Shangri-La is that of a band of nomadic warriors on horseback, more suited to the 19th century American Southwest during the turbulent era of manifest destiny, or among the armies of Chinggis Khaan during the Mongol Empire's conquests, than the fantastical Shangri-La image of Tibet as a mountainous, pacifist, hermit kingdom. And yet this is exactly what we find in Eastern Tibet. Today we're going to be talking about the Khampa, a fiercely independent ethnic subgroup of the Tibetan people native to the eastern region of the Tibetan Plateau, historically known as the Tibetan province of Kham. The Khampa's rich and complex history is deeply intertwined with the broader saga of Tibet's history, stretching from Yunnan province in the southwest of China to the kingdom of Mustang in far western Nepal. The Khampa Tibetans are one of three major subgroups of the Tibetan people who are distinguished by province. Alongside the Khampa Tibetans are the Uzang Tibetans of central Tibet, who dominate Tibet's largest cities, including the capital of Lhasa and the major city of Shigatse. The Amdo Tibetans are native to the northeastern Tibetan province of Amdo, close to Tibet's frontiers with the Silk Road, mainland China, and Central Asia. The Khampa Tibetans have inhabited the Eastern Tibetan Plateau for millennia, even before Eastern Tibet's formal inclusion into the Tibetan Empire. The region of Kham is defined by rugged mountains, highland grasslands, and fertile valleys. The Khampa Tibetans have historically been known for their fierce independence and warrior culture. Organized into many tribes and clans, the Khampas historically often engaged in cycles of intertribal conflict, alliances, and their fierce resistance against interlopers. The Khampas are celebrated for their strong oral tradition, epic tales and songs passed down generations, glorifying their history and their heroes. Chief among these is the epic of King Gesar of Ling, an epic from Kham, sung by bards all across Central Asia, from the Tuvan Republic in Siberia, north of Mongolia, to Baltistan in the Pakistani Himalayas. Eastern Tibet came under the rule of the Tibetan Empire and was formally included as a province of Tibet between the 7th and 10th centuries. The Khampa Tibetans of this region today are descendants of thousands of Tibetan imperial soldiers who were sent from central Tibet to guard the empire's eastern frontier against invaders. Over time, these central Tibetan soldiers settled, intermarried, and amalgamated with the preceding indigenous inhabitants of eastern Tibet, who are believed to have been the people attested in Chinese historical records as the Chang tribes. Now, there is a bit of confusion, since many Chinese historical texts refer to all of the indigenous inhabitants of the Tibetan Plateau west of the Chinese mainland as being collectively just the Chang, including the central Tibetans who would establish the Tibetan Empire. But for the purposes of staying relevant to today's subject, the Chang tribes simply refer to speakers of the Changic languages of the Tibeto-Burman language family as opposed to the Tibetic languages of this same language family, and which are spoken by the majority of the Tibetan people today. Even today, some Khampa Tibetans are speakers of Changic languages, which attests to their diverse origins. And there also remains to this day a Chang ethnic group, separate from the Tibetan ethnic group recognized by the Chinese government, who are most likely one of the tribes of Eastern Tibet that did not submit to Central Tibetan cultural assimilation in the aftermath of the Tibetan Empire's conquest of Eastern Tibet. This fusion of the imperial Tibetan soldiers and indigenous Eastern Tibetan frontier cultures formed a distinct warrior culture and produced a heavily equestrian society renowned for its horsemanship and marksmanship, giving rise to the romanticized, hyper-masculinized image that the Khampa Tibetans of today have in Tibetan China. Traditional Khampa festivities often include thrilling horse races and displays of martial prowess. The traditional dress of the Khampas often features colorful headgear known as tupshup, long-sleeved local variations of the Tibetan national dress known as the chuba. Among the men, ornate waist knives and fur-lined coats, all symbols of their warrior ethos and pride in their Tibetan imperial heritage. One of Eastern Tibet's many cultural landmarks is the Derge Parkang, or Derge Printing Temple, which houses the largest collection of Tibetan woodblocks in the world. It has long been devoted to the printing and preservation of Tibetan Buddhist literature. Some of Tibet's greatest spiritual leaders, philosophers, and artists have hailed from Eastern Tibet. The Khampa Tibetans speak the Kham dialect of the Tibetan language group, with notable internal diversity. Even within Eastern Tibet, the dialects vary significantly. From northern Kham, which is coterminous with the southern part of Qinghai province of western China, to central Kham, which is coterminous with much of the western part of Sichuan province, to southern Kham, which is coterminous with the northernmost part of Yunnan province of southwest China. The diversity in these dialects within Kham reflects centuries of geographic, social, and cultural variation. Khampa Tibetans have a long and storied history of resisting external domination, whether from the Chinese to the east or even the central Tibetan government in Lhasa to the west. One of the most remarkable figures in Khampa, and might I just say the history of Tibet in general, is the 19th century Khampa chieftain Gompo Namgyel, also known as the blind warrior of Nyarong, or Pulungwa, meaning the blind warrior. Born in the Nyarong Valley of Kham, he descended from a line of local chieftains who had long resisted both Qing rule and the central authority of the Tibetan government in Lhasa. He was a lot like the Tibetan William Wallace, quite literally. Gompo Namgyal's father was executed for defying the Qing dynasty, a formative event that inspired Gompo Namgyal's own path of resistance. In only his 30s, Gompo Namgyal began unifying rival chieftains in the Nyarong Valley of Kham through bold military campaigns. His leadership blended charismatic authority with brutal military tactics. By the late 1840s, he had forged a unified Nyarong region and began expanding into neighboring regions of Kham like the kingdoms of Derge and Litang. His reputation for battlefield ferocity led many of his rivals to submit without even a fight. At the same time, the Qing dynasty to the east was struggling with foreign incursions like the Opium War and internal revolts like the Taiping Rebellion, weakening their grip over Tibetan regions. Likewise, internal instability within central Tibet at that time limited the Lhasa government's ability to counter the rise of Gompo Namgyal. In 1862, while the Civil War was raging on the other side of the world in the United States, Gompo Namgyal seized control of critical trade routes between Sichuan and Tibet, creating an immense diplomatic and economic crisis. He even threatened to invade Lhasa, install his own regime, which would most likely have been far more aggressive and militaristic, and desecrate the sacred Chokhang Temple of Lhasa. These threats finally put Gompo Namgyal on the radar of the Lhasa government. By 1864, all of Kham was virtually under Gompo Namgyal's control, posing a serious militaristic threat to the Lhasa government's territory to the west and the Qing dynasty's territories to the east. In 1865, the Tibetan government mounted a retaliatory campaign with Qing support against Gompo Namgyal. His stronghold at Puri village in Kham was surrounded by the combined forces of both the Qing and Lhasa. Refusing to surrender, he set his fortress ablaze and perished in the flames. His death marked the end of his rebellion and signaled a renewed Lhasa-backed consolidation of power in eastern Tibet. To this day, Gompo Namgyal's legacy is controversial. He is viewed by some Khampa Tibetans as a national hero and a martyr against imperialism in Kham. And some Tibetan historians believe that had Gompo Namgyal been successful in his consolidation of power in Lhasa and his installation of a new regime, that regime would have been far more aggressive and militaristic and perhaps far more successful in repelling foreign interferences in Tibet. But in spite of this, he is also seen by others as a ruthless warlord who disrupted fragile regional balance in Tibet. About 70 years after Gompo Namgyal's rebellion, there was once again conflict in eastern Tibet involving many similar combatants, but under very different pretenses. Fast forward to the 1930s, the Pangdatang clan, a powerful, wealthy Khampa Tibetan trading family, and in fact the richest in all of the Tibetan Plateau at their height, who controlled much of the wool trade between Tibet and China in the early 20th century. After the 13th Dalai Lama's passing, the Pangdatang family's main political ally, a member of the so-called Tibet Improvement Party in Lhasa, the first of its kind, was purged by conservative Tibetan officials of the central government. Subsequently, the Pangdatang family turned against the Lhasa government by staging another rebellion in Kham. But it wasn't just about the money. It was personal, political, and revolutionary. Led by Tobge Pangdatang of the Pangdatang family, the family rallied tribal warriors across western Kham, planning to seize Chamdo, as we said, the largest city in Kham, gather more forces to march onwards to Lhasa, echoing Gompo Namgyal's exact ambitions just 70 years prior. Meanwhile, Tobge's brother, Rabga Pangdatang, a radical, translated Sun Yat-sen's Republican Chinese ideology into Tibetan. As we said, they even formed the Tibet Improvement Party to create a modern, secular Tibetan state, aligned with the Kuomintang government of the Republic of China. But like Gompo Namgyal, the Pangdatang's rebellion was ultimately crushed, caught between the army of Lhasa, the forces of the ironically Kuomintang-affiliated warlord of Sichuan province, Liu Wenhui, and even forces of the Chinese communists passing through eastern Tibet on the Long March. The Pangdatang family's property in Lhasa was seized after the rebellion. The family's patriarch, Rabga, fled to India, where he continued political work in exile.
The history of the Khampa Tibetans isn't just about their rebellions or their conflicts. It's about a people who have thrived in some of the harshest landscapes on earth. Warriors, spiritual figures, traders, and herders alike, known for their courage, independence, and fierce loyalty to their homeland. And honestly, in today's video, I've only barely scratched the surface of Eastern Tibetan history. We didn't even touch on the later 20th century Khampa Tibetan history or the incredible spiritual figures who hail from the region or the dramatic conquests by Khampas of neighboring lands and other stories of their resilience against interlopers. And the Khampas are just one chapter in what I believe to be the criminally overlooked saga of Tibetan history. A saga that the Khampa Tibetans have contributed with their reputation for courage, independence, and vitality. In remembering the Khampa Tibetans, we recognize a culture that has stood firm against time, rooted in its land, yet unyielding in its character.